heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow skies, a blue wind, the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops, oh, way above the chimney tops. That's where you find me. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops, oh, way above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow sky.
Hi, my name is David Blackwell. I'm a member of the Hopewell Township Historic Preservation Commission. We have good stories to tell, and hopefully people will find them valuable.
Rise up, O men of God, have done with lesser things. Give heart and mind and soul and strength to serve the King of Kings. Rise up, O men of God, His kingdom tarries long. Bring in the day of brotherhood and end the night of wrong.
My name is Bonita Kraft Grant, and I have known David Blackwell probably since the mid-1980s, when we served together on what was then the Hopewell Township Historic Sites Committee. Today it is a commission, and David was recently named the Hopewell Township Historian.
Hi, my name is Kate Hepburn. I'm the Vice President of the Hopewell Museum. I worked with David on this project here after we hired him as our curator and archivist. This room is our Civil War room, and he was very proud of this when he finished it. He worked very hard on it to research each item.
I also was involved with David through the Hopewell Valley Historical Society, where he served in every office there was, and most recently was secretary for the Historical Society.
One of the first projects I did with David Blackwell was to clear the shelves. So we cleared a lot of glassware in here and made room for his research books and some older books that the museum has here, and research files that he has in bound albums.
David is an irreplaceable person. He was an architect by training, but he also knew genealogy and the history of this area like the back of his hand. And it was everyone's history. So we will not see his like again. We have many wonderful historians, archaeologists, genealogists, but we don't have anyone like David. So it was an honor and a privilege to know him.
You remember me when the west wind moves among the fields of barley. You can tell the sun in his jealous sky when we walked in fields of gold. So she took her love for to gaze a while among the fields of barley.
I'm Eric Holterman. I'm an architect, also a resident of Pennington, New Jersey. I'm an architect with HMR Architects in Princeton, and we were the architects for the restoration of the Henry Phillips House, which is behind me. We worked with David when we were doing that restoration because he had so much information about not just the architecture of the house, but also the people who lived there, how they had lived there, some of the things that they owned when they lived there, grandparents living there, ages of children, things like that, which really helped us to interpret the interior of the house. Also, he just knew so much about the local history and sort of local architectural specialties, things that happened in this region that may not happen in other regions, that really helped explain information that we needed in order to put together a full restoration of the house. When we were working on the restoration of this room, the main parlor at the Henry Phillips House, we opened up these closets and found this signature in the back, Samuel Chatton, Pennington, August 9th, 1863. And I called David Blackwell and asked him about Samuel Chatton, told him what we'd found, and he told me, guess what? Samuel Chatton used to live down the street from you in Pennington, right on Main Street, and he worked here as a carpenter. As we were working on the restoration of this room, we knew when we got behind the old plaster that there was originally a mantel here, but the mantel was long gone. So we were able to see the ghost, the outline of where the mantel would be, so that we had its exact dimensions and proportions, but we didn't know the design of the mantel. I spoke to David about the design of a mantel and what was a typical kind of mantel for this part of Hopewell Valley. He pointed out right away that in fact a lot of the mantels in Hopewell Valley were sort of specific to this region and were a little different than you might find somewhere else. That, for instance, they have this bullet-shaped molding near the top. They have this broad panel. Sometimes this panel had sort of a wavy pattern. In this case, we reinterpreted just with a simpler flat panel. But that the overall design with the bullseyes, the pilasters, the panel, the moldings, all of that was sort of very specific to Hopewell Valley. He pointed out 3 or 4 or 5 other houses that I could go look at where I was able to document those mantels and then come back here and design this mantel, which is here. And without David, I wouldn't have known where those other mantels were.
David was such a force in our community, in the historical preservation community. First met David in 1992. We ended up being the brokers for a project. He was representing the owner, I was representing the builder, and it was up to us to get the deal done, and we were able to do it. It was kind of the most unlikely of people to force the project to happen, but we were able to get it done. And that was when our professional relationship started, and then our friendship. We ended up serving on the Historic Sites Committee for many years, and then we became a Preservation Commission. And David was so instrumental in the listing of all of our local register properties. He would go out and talk with the folks and convince them that it was a good idea, that it was a noble thing to do. And he was very persuasive. I used to joke to him that he looked a little bit like Colonel Sanders, and then I'd always say, but you're better looking. He had a very stately presence. He was really the face of the Historic Preservation Commission in Hopewell Township. I've been chair now for 7 or 8 years, but all the correspondence still goes to him. He would go to the public meetings, he would go to the Township Committee and be the voice of the Historic Commission. And I'm really going to miss that part of his duties because he was so good at it. People would just stop what they were doing and listen to him. He was responsible for the Jacobs Creek Historic District nomination and all of the groundwork. He went through and did all of the groundwork with the Penn East pipeline, really marking the archaeological sites that were in existence. He just really was a force. One of the other jokes that we all had with him was that we would, upon his death, we'd want to download his brain because he had such a wealth of knowledge and had such amazing recall. Just really, David, I wish you were here on a day like today at the Howell Living Farm, a beautiful place, a beautiful setting. I know you enjoyed it here, and we're all thinking of you and very thankful of our having known you.
I'm a recent immigrant to the Hopewell Valley. I was born in northern New Jersey and moved to Pennington in 1999. I was always surprised that Pennington did not have a historic district, and in 2010 got together with some council people in Pennington and we began to put together a historic district for Pennington. David was instrumental in that movement in that obviously he knew more about the history of Pennington than anyone else. So he helped us a lot, not only with the history of the buildings, but also the social history of who had lived where, when, and with his information we were really able to put together a very, very good history of Pennington. For instance, there's an architectural thing that happens with all the houses, and many of the houses on Main Street in Pennington where the roofs were raised in the late 1800s on earlier federal houses. He explained all of that to me. I wouldn't have known that without him. So he was incredibly generous with his time, gave us put a lot of effort into our movement to create a historic district, which was ultimately successful, where a previous effort had not been successful. So I'm eternally grateful for all the effort that he put into that, and that certainly helped us have a historic district in Pennington today. Most recently, I talked to him only a few weeks ago about getting together with him to do a verbal history, walking down Main Street in Pennington and getting a history of many of the houses, since he knew so much about every single house. And he said, well, I'm kind of busy right now, let's do that in the fall. So we had that date in the fall to go through and get verbal history from him of the houses in Pennington, which I'm so sorry to miss. Anyway, so that's just one instance in the way that David will be missed because he knew so much about the history here and was so generous with it. Thanks.
I met David back in the late 1880s when I first got involved at Howell Farm and looking at the history of Pleasant Valley area that Howell Farm is part of. And I needed to know about the families. As an historian, I like people. And David knew the stories of people and knew the family connections, but also, what land they lived on, how old the houses were, how long the families had been here, how they interacted with each other, all of those cool stories that made the Pleasant Valley come alive. And one of our first projects was to develop tours, horse-drawn wagon tours of the outskirts of Howell Farm and the other areas of Pleasant Valley here. And David would be the narrator on those tours, and I was also to some degree, but I always made sure that I rode with David and learned from him and was able to ask him questions about the families in the valley. And he just kind of made the place come alive. And by place, I mean the whole Pleasant Valley area. So that got me really interested. And as I say, as somebody from outside the township, I became very interested and in love with the history of the township, and have continued to work on that. And David has supported me every step of the way. He's not only provided information for me, but also just encouragement to go and learn more about particularly the farm life in Hopewell Township. And I said I was president of the Hopewell Valley Historical Society now, and I believe that David was on the nominating committee when I was asked to be on the board, and he certainly welcomed me with open arms and just did everything to encourage me. And I've been on the board now for over 6 years, so I understand exactly the things that David was involved with and the extent that he was involved, and about all the people that he helped over the years and helped to develop the same appreciation for the history of the township that he helped me develop over the last 20 years or so.
I met David when I was in my 20s. We're cousins distantly, and we became good friends at that point through his genealogical research and our common interests. And I've enjoyed that friendship for 30 years now. And most recently, as president of the Hopewell Museum, I worked with David directly there in his capacity as our archivist and acting curator. And one thing I wanted to say was David really had a remarkable way of doing family history, because he looked at families from the perspective of how the land was used and how it passed down in those families. And most genealogists look at the names and the dates. Maybe they're interested in tying themselves to some famous ancestor. But David always looked at it in terms of, who lived on that farm, who lived at that mill, and how did that land pass down. And he was able to put together connections in different ways than most genealogists tend to do. A lot of researchers are a little bit hesitant to use the more complicated land records and court cases and that kind of thing. And so that was always a fascinating thing for me. If I couldn't find the answer, I could say, David, well, what do you think about this? And then he'd say, well, that might make sense because this family lived there, and then it'd come up with another way to approach the question. And he was very, very generous. So since his passing, actually, it's happened, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times already, that he had made arrangements to show someone a special location or historic site in the township on his own free time before the museum hours opened. And we didn't know that he was doing that. And of course, they showed up and didn't know that he was gone. And it just showed me so many times already since his passing just how generous he was with the knowledge that he had. And we'll really miss him a lot. I will miss him a lot.
This is the one for Hopewell Valley, driving up Route 31 in the fall. The falling leaves slip by my window. The autumn leaves of red and gold. I see your lips, the summer kisses, those sunburned hands I used to hold. And since you went away, the days grow long, and soon I'll hear old winter song. And I miss you most of all, my
start to fall. The falling leaves slip by my window. The autumn leaves of red and gold, and I see your lips, the summer kisses, those sunburned hands I used to hold. And since you went away, the days grow long, and soon I'll hear old winter song, and I miss you most of all, my darling. When those autumn leaves start to fall.
When you were introducing yourself,
Yeah.
You said that you and David met back in the 1880s.
That tickled me.
Did I do that?
Yeah, you said 1880s. We see where you're headed, Larry. That made me laugh so inside.
Whoa! It wasn't quite that long ago. That was the 1980s.
Yeah, we might have some bloopers.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah,
funny. It's kind of appropriate in a funny sort of way.
Yeah.
That, that you referenced the 1880s. I mean, how much time do you spend your nose and your
that's
brain in the 1880s?
it's the 1880s and 90s that are the heart of what Howell Farm interprets in Pleasant Valley.
There you go.
So I do think of this place in the
You're an
1880s
actor.
and
You were staying in
1890s.
character, Larry.
That's right. That's right.
It's very, very funny and very appropriate.
Okay, very good.
Good.
We are done.